I always say that I never sang any style of music that I hadn't heard in my household growing up before I was the age of 10.
Linda Ronstadt has decided she's done holding back. You know how most legends, when they get older, they mellow out and start speaking in polite? Linda didn't get that memo. Instead, she's gone ahead and dropped a bombshell list. 7 musicians she straight up could not stand. Now, some of the people on her list are shocking, the kind of names you'd never expect her to drag. So here's the big question. Who makes the cut? Don't even think about clicking away, because the last 2 names on her list will have you absolutely shook. Come along. Number 7. Don Henley. Before becoming one of rock's most recognizable voices, Don Henley was simply the man behind the drums in Linda Ronstadt's touring band. Their professional relationship would ultimately spark the formation of one of music's most successful groups, while simultaneously planting the seeds for one of Ronstadt's most painful musical betrayals. In early 1971, Linda Ronstadt needed musicians for her touring band. Her producer John Boylan recommended several promising talents, including drummer Don Henley and guitarist Glenn Frey. At this point, Ronstadt was already an established artist, while Henley was still relatively unknown. He had moved to Los Angeles from Texas with his band Shiloh to record an album produced by Kenny Rogers. Henley had actually sent Ronstadt songs he had written, hoping she might record them. Although those particular songs weren't suitable for her at the time, she was impressed by his drumming at the Troubadour, noting how he skillfully blended country with rock in a way that didn't compromise either genre. During that tour, something significant happened. Henley and Frey, who were rooming together due to budget constraints, discovered their mutual talent for songwriting and harmonizing. Frey began referring to Henley as his secret weapon and expressed his desire to form a band with him, an idea Ronstadt enthusiastically supported. Furthermore, Ronstadt played an instrumental role in the Eagles' formation. She suggested Bernie Leadon as a guitarist, while John Boylan recommended Randy Meisner. The band even used Ronstadt's living room for rehearsals due to its size. She recalled coming home one day to hear them practicing Witchy Woman with 4-part harmonies, immediately recognizing it as a future hit. As the Eagles soared to fame with hits like Take It Easy and Desperado, the dynamics between Ronstadt and Henley dramatically shifted. The breaking point came in 1975 at the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles. By this time, Henley's personality had reportedly transformed. Friends observed that his early humility had vanished as the Eagles' popularity exploded. Backstage at the venue, Henley made a comment that would permanently fracture their relationship. He mockingly suggested that Ronstadt should stick to covers and let real songwriters speak. For someone who had given him his big break and championed his career, this dismissal of her artistry cut deeply. The insult wasn't just professionally offensive, but felt like a personal betrayal. Rather than causing a public scene, Ronstadt responded decisively. She revoked Henley's tour credentials and removed him from her performances. The situation deteriorated further when industry insiders reported that Henley had begun using Ronstadt's name to access shows and venues, even requesting backstage passes under her banner for events she wasn't attending. When she discovered this, she immediately blocked his access to all her concerts. Behind closed doors, Ronstadt's assessment of Henley was scathing yet revealing. She privately referred to him as a climber who lost his soul chasing fame. This wasn't merely about hurt feelings. It reflected her observation of how success had fundamentally changed someone she once supported. Industry sources described Henley's transformation as dramatic. Once grateful and quiet, he had become, in many accounts, distant and self-important. What particularly wounded Ronstadt wasn't just Henley's fame, but his apparent unwillingness to acknowledge how he had achieved it. Unlike other creative differences Ronstadt experienced throughout her career, this conflict wasn't about musical direction. It was about respect and recognition. Ironically, while Henley was finding massive success with Hotel California in 1977, Ronstadt maintained her dignified silence. She never publicly dragged his name through the mud, instead letting the quality of her own work speak for itself. Meanwhile, she watched as internal tensions within the Eagles themselves grew. eventually leading to their temporary breakup after the Long Run album in 1979. Now, if you thought that first name Linda dropped was surprising, just wait until you hear the next one. It almost feels impossible that someone like her could hold such strong feelings toward another huge star, right? Buckle up, because the next person on her list might leave you scratching your head, wondering what could have possibly gone so wrong between them. Number 6. Jim Morrison. Linda Ronstadt's clash with Jim Morrison represents a stark contrast to her experience with Don Henley. If Henley's betrayal was personal, her contempt for Morrison stemmed from witnessing the dark side of rock stardom firsthand, a visceral distaste that began in the smoky clubs of 1960s Los Angeles. The initial encounter between Ronstadt and Morrison occurred at the legendary Whiskey A Go-Go in 1968, as both artists were navigating the competitive Los Angeles music scene. The Doors had just recorded Light My Fire, which hadn't yet become a massive hit. As Morrison performed, Ronstadt was struck by the band's talent, but had an unexpected reaction. "I thought if they'd gotten a better singer, they'd be a much better group." What began as professional observation escalated into personal humiliation at a private after-party near the Whiskey A Go-Go. An intoxicated Morrison pulled Ronstadt onto the stage mid-performance, not as a gesture of musical camaraderie, but as a spectacle. He attempted to kiss her in front of the audience, knocking over her microphone stand in the process. The crowd's reaction, laughing and cheering, only intensified Ronstadt's embarrassment. Moreover, the incident wasn't merely forgotten. Morrison subsequently mocked her in interviews, dismissively labeling her as sweet but spineless. For a young woman fighting to establish herself in a male-dominated industry, these words cut deeper than the public humiliation itself. What particularly disturbed Ronstadt about Morrison was his dramatic personality transformation when drinking. When he was not drunk, he seemed nice enough. But as soon as he began to drink, he got wild very quickly, she recalled. This Jekyll and Hyde metamorphosis alarmed the young singer, who admitted, "I'd never been around that kind of heavy drinking, and seeing someone, like Jim, who had such a personality change when he drank. I was very young, and it frightened me." Additionally, Ronstadt observed Morrison's personal habits with distaste. He was drunk all the time, and he wore the same pair of snakeskin pants every day. Gross. He wasn't exactly the person you wanted to sit next to, you know? According to Ronstadt, Morrison represented everything problematic about rock culture in the late 1960s. She found particularly troubling the way that the audience and the people that have maybe a terrible identity crisis would project themselves up on the stage onto Morrison and then just kind of idolize him. It was this kind of narcissistic feeding frenzy. It was really disturbing. This dynamic epitomized what Ronstadt came to view as toxic masculinity in rock, where talent became secondary to spectacle, and women were often reduced to props in a male-dominated narrative. From her perspective, Morrison embodied everything wrong with rock's wild excess: arrogant, reckless, and cruel. Consequently, her disdain for Morrison wasn't merely personal dislike, but a rejection of the destructive aspects of fame that she witnessed destroying a potentially brilliant artist. Her experience with him ultimately strengthened her resolve to fight for respect and dignity in an industry that often prized chaos over craft. Number 5. Neil Young. Unlike her outright hostility towards some industry colleagues, Linda Ronstadt's relationship with Neil Young began as a genuine artistic partnership before deteriorating into mutual disappointment. Their professional connection initially flourished through collaborative efforts that helped launch Ronstadt into wider rock circles. Their initial bond formed during the early 1970s when both appeared on Johnny Cash's television show. Young, evidently impressed with Ronstadt's vocal talents, invited her to sing backup on his emerging classics Heart of Gold and Old Man for his seminal Harvest album. This experience left a positive impression on Ronstadt, who recalled, "I remember singing all night long and never getting bored." I love Neil's music. The relationship strengthened in 1974 when Ronstadt joined Young's tour, exposing her to substantially larger venues than she had previously experienced. As a club act, we weren't really ready for Madison Square Garden, but we did our best, she admitted. Regardless of these challenges, Ronstadt showed remarkable dedication, staying for Young's entire 2-hour performances each night. Nevertheless, the friendship fractured during a Farm Aid benefit concert in 1985. While Willie Nelson, Young, and John Mellencamp had co-founded the event to support American family farmers, tensions erupted backstage when Ronstadt arrived to perform. Young, upon reviewing her planned set list, abruptly demanded changes, insisting her selections were too soft for the event's political message. As one industry insider remarked, Neil rejected her entire setlist hours before she was scheduled to perform, leaving her scrambling to rework her entire show. This unexpected interference left Ronstadt feeling undermined and disrespected, especially considering her own legitimate concern for agricultural issues. Following the Farm Aid incident, Ronstadt began viewing Young as someone whose public stance on moral issues contradicted his private behavior. This impression solidified when she learned Young had advised her protégé, Nicolette Larson, not to get involved with him because he doesn't live in the real world. In private conversations, Ronstadt characterized Young as someone who preached about authenticity while controlling others' artistic expression, behavior she interpreted as fundamentally hypocritical for an artist who positioned himself as a champion of creative freedom. For Ronstadt, Young represented a particular type of artistic contradiction, someone whose undeniable talent was matched by what she perceived as moral inconsistency, making him perhaps the most complex figure among the musicians she came to distrust over her lengthy career. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because the next musician Linda called out wasn't just some casual acquaintance. No, this was someone who shared the stage with her, someone audiences assumed she respected. And yet, behind closed doors, things were very, very different. Stick around, because her next revelation proves that even legends have breaking points. Number 4. Frank Zappa. What began as a curious musical experiment between Linda Ronstadt and Frank Zappa in 1974 eventually became one of the singer's most uncomfortable professional encounters. Their brief interaction would reveal how stark differences in creative approach could transform potential collaboration into lasting animosity. In the early 1970s, Ronstadt was actively expanding her musical horizons beyond country rock. She had already recorded an advertisement with Zappa for Remington electric razors, an unusual pairing that Ronstadt herself described as like Bambi and Deep Throat on the same bill. This unexpected collaboration sparked her interest in exploring Zappa's experimental approach to music. The idea of them working together made theoretical sense. Ronstadt sought to push her artistic boundaries, whereas Zappa was searching for fresh voices to bring his complex compositions to life. On paper, their different backgrounds might have created something genuinely innovative, her melodic strength complementing his avant-garde sensibilities. Their initial connection showed promise. Ronstadt appreciated Zappa's boundary-pushing approach and expressed interest in recording material he had written. For his part, Zappa recognized her powerful voice could potentially elevate his experimental compositions. Nonetheless, what seemed like an exciting creative opportunity would quickly deteriorate. From the moment they began working together, tensions emerged. Zappa, renowned for his perfectionism and exacting standards, approached the session with a formality that bordered on authoritarian. His management style left little room for creative exchange or mutual respect. Whenever Ronstadt offered input or suggested slight adjustments to phrasing or melody, Zappa didn't simply correct her, he openly mocked her contributions. He characterized her singing style as too sanitized for his music and accused her of trying to transform his raw compositions into something more commercially palatable. The criticism wasn't delivered privately or constructively. Instead, Zappa dismissed her ideas with laughter in full view of the entire studio team. This public humiliation made the situation increasingly uncomfortable as the session progressed. Zappa reportedly told colleagues that Ronstadt's approach was proof that pop artists couldn't handle serious music. The breaking point came during a rehearsal when Zappa abruptly halted the band mid-song. Turning to face Ronstadt in front of everyone present, he delivered the cutting remark, "This is what happens when you hand real music to a pop singer." This deliberate insult, delivered with Zappa's characteristic sarcasm, was the final straw. Humiliated yet dignified, Ronstadt didn't argue or create a scene. She simply gathered her belongings and left before the session concluded. There was no dramatic confrontation or heated exchange, just silence that would stretch across decades. The two never worked together again, thereby ensuring the session tapes remained shelved and forgotten. Number 3. David Crosby. In contrast to her experiences with previous musicians, Linda Ronstadt's relationship with David Crosby deteriorated rapidly due to his increasingly difficult personality. The cantankerous singer-songwriter, once a respected voice in the folk rock movement, became known for burning bridges with almost everyone in his orbit, Ronstadt included. By all accounts, Crosby had become insufferable and difficult in his later years. The man himself admitted to having a big ego and no brains, a rare moment of self-awareness that did little to repair his fractured relationships. His prickly personality and notorious temper alienated even his closest collaborators. It wasn't just his substance abuse problems, which resulted in highly publicized prison time, that drove people away. In fact, many of Crosby's friends and collaborators eventually wanted nothing to do with him, primarily because of his abrasive behavior. As his career progressed, Crosby's fall from grace became increasingly evident to those around him. The documentary David Crosby, Remember My Name revealed much about his complicated nature. Given that Crosby himself drove the film, it felt more autobiographical than objective. Yet even in this self-directed portrait, his difficult personality shone through. The film showed Crosby stopping at significant locations in Los Angeles and Laurel Canyon that shaped his career, seemingly confronting his past mistakes. The defining moment in Ronstadt and Crosby's deteriorating relationship occurred during a vocal session for a collaborative track. In the golden haze of Laurel Canyon, they had once been like musical kin, sharing not just stages and studio time, yet an unspoken trust rooted in the countercultural movement they both helped shape. This harmony shattered in 1978 when Linda requested a simple key change during their session, one that would better fit her voice. Crosby flatly refused, dismissively telling her, "You should learn to adapt." This minor disagreement quickly escalated into a heated exchange of words. What might have remained a private disagreement soon became public knowledge. Within days, their argument had leaked to the press, turning into one of the most whispered about clashes in the canyon. Now, you might assume Linda saved the most dramatic names for last, but no, she doesn't waste any time. The very next person she admits to hating will make you question everything you thought you knew about her career. Don't blink now, because this next name comes with a story that's almost too wild to believe. Come along. Number 2. Elvis Costello. The 1979 Cleveland Music Festival became the backdrop for one of Linda Ronstadt's most pointed musical feuds, highlighting the generational divide between established artists and punk rock's emerging voices. Her encounter with Elvis Costello would leave a lasting impression about the changing tides in the music industry. During this pivotal event, Ronstadt stood as an established headliner at the peak of her commercial powers. Costello, on the other hand, represented the new wave, brash, brilliant, and unfiltered, punk rock's intellectual rebel with something to prove. The tension ignited unexpectedly when Costello, speaking to a cluster of reporters, sneered dismissively about Ronstadt's performance, calling her set background music for brunch. This wasn't merely a passing critique, yet a calculated public humiliation that quickly circulated throughout the festival grounds. Upon hearing about these remarks, Ronstadt sought Costello backstage, hoping for either clarification or perhaps an apology. What she received henceforth was entirely different. Reportedly intoxicated and arrogant, Costello looked her directly in the eye, delivered another cold insult, and walked away without showing any remorse. Years later, Costello publicly expressed regret for his behavior, acknowledging on his website, "To say the least, I lacked grace." He even revealed that Ronstadt's versions of his songs had financially supported his early career. It was Linda Ronstadt's rendition of Allison that kept petrol in our tour bus. Considering this belated acknowledgement, Ronstadt responded with characteristic graciousness. "I understood exactly where he was coming from and why it had bothered him." Number 1. Paul Simon. Linda Ronstadt's relationship with Paul Simon stands apart as perhaps the most politically charged of her musical disagreements. centering around their work on Simon's landmark Graceland album and the shadows cast by South Africa's apartheid regime. The controversy stemmed primarily from Ronstadt's previous decision to perform at Sun City, a luxury resort in apartheid South Africa, for which she had received $500,000. Simon himself had previously turned down offers to perform there. Nevertheless, he chose Ronstadt for Graceland, creating what critics called a deliberate, considered, headstrong slap in the face to anti-apartheid activists. Throughout this period, Simon maintained a rigid perfectionism about his work. For this reason, many industry insiders noted he was dismissive of input from collaborators. Their professionally cordial but personally distant relationship taught Ronstadt to scrutinize the political implications of her artistic choices more carefully. Interestingly, despite these tensions, their vocal blend on Under African Skies remains one of Graceland's most gorgeous moments. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.